We're going to ask the question, is it possible to learn 20, 30, 40, or some crazy number like that languages to any type of level of fluency? And is that something that should be desired, something that we need to try to figure out? How can we learn 100 different languages overnight, basically? And so I'm going to start by just going through the languages that I've studied over the years and kind of rank them at the level of which I've been able to study them, and kind of give you a perspective of somebody like me that's extremely interested in studying foreign languages. And I've dabbled in over 20 languages myself. What type of fluency is reasonable to expect? And some of this is going to be kind of to get back at some of those YouTubers that are trying to say, hey, I'm fluent in 20, 30, 40 languages. I'm fluent in 100 languages. What's actually reasonable and what can we expect? So I'm going to just go through the languages that I've studied, starting with Chinese. This was the first foreign language that I studied to any certain level. I was 10 years old when I picked up this study, and I'll show you the kind of levels. I was able to learn some numbers, colors, fruits and vegetables, very few verbs. This was a bit of a problem because as far as talking in Chinese, I was never able to pick up the tones. So I can read some simple characters. I would say that my level is extremely basic. Okay. It was fun. I was able to count, but even counting, I could give it a shot, but I won't have the tones all right. E, R, san, su, wu, leo, chi, ba, jio, sure. It's not perfect. But I remember one time I was trying to impress a Chinese person, and I said, I know how to say Lao Shi Pao, and I was trying to say the teacher's running, and he's like, oh, you said a little rat. Little rat's running around. And I'm like, yep, that's my Chinese. So Chinese is cool, but anybody that says they're proficient in Chinese, either they're extremely capable learner and they've picked up the tones, they've put a lot of work and effort into it, they have very good ear listening skills, or they probably don't know Chinese unless they're immersed in it. That's at least my take. So kudos to all of you language learners that have actually studied Chinese and have success in it. There's a lot of people that I know that do have Chinese as one of their many languages they've studied and have done very well in Chinese. For me, it's kind of like, hey, I learned a little bit of Chinese when I was 10. That's not something that I've pushed to try to learn at any higher level, than maybe ni hao, something like that. Koine Greek. I studied Koine Greek since I was 11, and I've pretty much been studying it ever since, nonstop, for 17 years. So I would say I'm as close to an expert level as possible. I got my degree in classics. I'm going to be working on a master's degree over the next few years. And so this is something where I put a whole lot of work and effort into it. If you've seen, I've been reading in Greek on the channel. I'm also teaching students Greek at a basic level. And this is something I put a whole lot of work and effort into, is Koine Greek, which is the biblical version of Greek, as opposed to modern Greek. If you're interested in what the difference is, there is a lot of difference, but I've compared modern Greek to biblical Greek, done a lot of studies with verb charts, I even collected Middle Greek. I didn't actually put this as one of my cards, but I've collected a medieval grammar of Greek, and I've gone through an intense study of how did Koine Greek turn into modern Greek and what is the middle term. This is something most classics majors do not do. They kind of don't care about the modern and medieval Greek. And so this is something that I can add to my repertoire of Greek. But again, do I have any real advanced level? I took 2 classes from the University of Athens online. I would say about a 2 level, my comprehension more or less a B2 level. And I would put a huge difference between that, because speaking Koine Greek, I've had practice speaking Koine Greek. As far as modern Greek, I have not had the experience that I'd like to say, like, hey, I'm a proficient modern Greek speaker. I would probably end up speaking Koine Greek, throwing in a lot of older vocabulary words if I was going to be speaking to modern people. It might sound a little bit old-fashioned, and I could maybe twist it, to sound more archaic, but I would be speaking like katharevusa, which is another form of like a modern Koine Greek. And so I could probably have a conversation with people in Greece where I would be speaking more like katharevusa, and they would be speaking modern Greek, and they would be like, okay, I could talk to you, but why don't we just speak English? I'd have to work on it to get to any real level of modern Greek to sound like a fluent native. Classical Attic Greek, that's something where Plato, Xenophon, this is the dialect of Greek that they spoke, and I've spent a lot of time working on that myself. As you've seen, I can read and know about 95% of the words I'm saying. Now, it's not enough to say, okay, like I could just read a text fluently, like just, pick up anything and just read it and don't need a translation. There's always going to be those few words, even 5%. It's too much to just pick it up and read it without a dictionary. So there's always going to be words I'll be looking up. But I'd say classical Greek, I do pretty well. And Ionian classical Greek, this is a different dialect. There's a lot more etas instead of alphas at the end. There's some differences in pronouns and other things. I've read through Herodotus, book 1, and I'd say I'm pretty decent at Ionian style Greek. But again, is this a different language? Is this a dialect? That's the other thing that a lot of polyglots, they don't always cover is they say how many languages they learn. And then the question is this another language, or are we talking about dialects of the same language? So for instance, Homeric Greek, you might expect I'm going to say I'm a master at Homeric Greek because I've studied all this Greek. I'm actually going to do the reverse. I'm going to say what? I have no idea. I tried. I read Homer's Odyssey book 1 with a teacher straight from University of Athens. I could parse the verbs. I understood some of what was happening, but I have no clue what's going on. So Homeric Greek, I do not speak, or no, I can't read Homeric Greek. And you could say, well, it's Greek. Well, this is an ancienter form of Greek. And so that's how that goes. Hi to whoever's in the chat. Thank you for watching. Modern Hebrew. Do I know Modern Hebrew? Ken, and Yokol Leberi, Imishu, and Yokol Ladat Mashani Kore, Mashani Ose, and Yokol Lebeo, Kol Mashani Rotse, Beivrit. This is Hebrew. I can talk pretty conversantly in Hebrew. I've been studying Hebrew since I was 13. Had private tutors online. I've been to Israel 7 times, and I would put my proficiency at about a B2 level. And so I'm going to actually make a different pile for any language that I actually know to a pretty good level. I'm going to say I actually know this language, as opposed to, let's say, Chinese. I'm going to say I dabbled in it, so I'm going to make a different thing for that. Homeric Greek, I'm going to put no, and I'm going to actually divide these. So Ionic Greek, I'm going to say with Hebrew, I know Ionic Greek. Attic Greek, I'm going to say I know that. You're going to say Bengal. I'm going to cover Sanskrit and Telugu here in a second, so we'll get there. Modern Greek, I'm going to say, this Chinese is like my dabbled in. Okay, Biblical Hebrew, I'm going to say, I understand Biblical Hebrew to a pretty advanced level. Took some college classes, studied college textbooks since I was 15. I've taught online to several adult students at a college level text. I'm going to say pretty good. I can read at least Genesis and good portion of the Old Testament, understand what I'm doing. So I'm going to say check mark, that's good. Biblical Aramaic. I did take a Biblical Aramaic class certified by the Hebrew University in 2022. I got an A-, okay? Got a few things wrong. I mastered the class. And then I went to the extent to rememorize all the vocabulary that wasn't in the class. Out of all the 700 Aramaic words in the Old Testament, only 300 were mandatory to memorize for that class. I memorized the 400 outside of the class so I could actually read Daniel. And I've tried to have a habit of going through either reading or listening to the book of Daniel every month since I took that class, which was about 3 years ago. So do I remember everything? Do I remember every word and all the grammar? No, not necessarily. But if I listen to Daniel, I can still listen. And when the king Nebuchadnezzar wakes up and he says, Halom Kalamti, well, that's actually Hebrew. But anyways, it switches. He speaks Hebrew and then it goes straight to Aramaic. And I understand that. Okay, Arabic. I've tried. This is one of the things I've tried, and I've failed miserably. I've tried to speak Arabic, and all I can say is Ana Mubarif Arabi. I do not speak Arabic. I'm going to put that in my pile with Homeric Greek. Latin. This is part of my major. Started studying Latin when I was 14, and I can say possum legere linguam Latinum possum legere. I could say legere. I've worked with different pronunciations. I could say Waini Mekum or Vaini Mekum. It's something where I've worked with different people that use the different pronunciations, study a pretty advanced level, and I'll be going to graduate school where we will actually be speaking Latin in graduate school with some of the world's experts in spoken Latin. And so I'm going to say this is one of the things where I'm extremely advanced. I could definitely use, more conversational experience, more vocabulary and all that. So I would say to a pretty good level. Sanskrit, this is where, to be more proper, I should call it Sanskritum. Sanskritum. I've studied 3 semesters through the Yogic Study program and was able to read some of the Bhagavad Gita. So I can't say that am that good. The Devanagari script is extremely difficult for me. I think if I grew up speaking Hindi or using the script in Hindi, this could have been a whole lot easier. I don't know why, but it's just extremely difficult. And then with all the duh sounds and tuh sounds and having a t and d and a t and duh, it's difficult. I don't know if Rajan in the chat, if you studied any Sanskritum, Bhagavad Gita, it's interesting. And I could say that I got to a fairly good level for introduction, understand the grammar. It's similar to Latin, similar to Greek. Understand a lot of the vocabulary, verb charts and noun charts and that kind of thing. But as far as comparing Sanskrit or Sanskritum with Greek and Latin, I definitely cannot say I'm at the same level. But I've definitely tried, and this is something that I want to work on more in the future because it is very, very fun. Now, I'm going to put it in the one that with modern Greek. I want to work on it more, not at that good of a level, but I've tried. Telugu, I can say I learned how to count. I was in India in 2013 and never learned how to read. The Telugu alphabet is so crazy. But let's see, I was learning Sanskrit language in school, 8th class. Okay, well, very good. Yeah, Sanskritum is a very nice language, but it's very difficult. So Telugu, I learned a little bit of Telugu, like I do, Ardu, Yedu. I don't know, Yemeni, Tomini, Padi. I just botched it all up. I learned how to count. I could count to 100 at one time in Telugu. So I could say that I tried a little bit of Telugu, had a Telugu Bible. I'm going to say I tried and I failed because that didn't go too well. So I'm going to put it over with the Homeric Greek and say I failed. German, I did start studying at 15, spoke regularly. There was a Coffee Stunde, jeden Woche von what would it be? From 4 zum 5, okay, from 4 to 5 every Friday. The college at Valparaiso University had a spoken coffee hour. I would attend when I was 15 on Fridays regularly, and then every Wednesday I was volunteering at World Missionary Press. There was a lot of people that were ex-Amish, and a lot of those ex-Amish would speak Pennsylvania Dutch or Hochdeutsch, and so I learned some Pennsylvania Dutch, like if I want to say ich bin müde, I'm tired. One of the guys was like, you got to say ich bin mead, okay, not müde, mead. And so the U sound in Pennsylvania Dutch becomes E. So if I wanted to say like, I don't know, well, müde, it's mead. If I want to say tote, I'd say toit or something like that. So some of it is a little bit weird. So it sounds kind of like Yiddish. I did take a college class, 101, 102, 201, and 202. I dropped the German 202, and there's a story behind that because I was in the middle of finishing my degree. I was at my 4th semester of German, and the homework, I was spending like 20 hours a week at this class, and I'm just like, I can't study 20 hours a week for German homework. There's too many words I don't know. And so I asked the teacher what I needed to do to be able to pass this class, and talked to some of the other classmates. And what I learned was that my classmates were, quote unquote, cheating. They were using AI and not quite AI yet, but they were using Google Translate and that kind of thing and translating articles that we're supposed to read into English and then using that mechanism to pass the class. And so I asked the teacher, is this something that I'd be allowed to do to pass the class? And of course, the teacher said, no, you're not allowed to use Google Translate. You got to use a dictionary. And I said, well, if I look all these words up in the dictionary, I'm spending like 20 hours a week and I got other classes. I mean, I have like 4 or 5 classes that semester, so I can't just spend 20 hours a week on this class, or I'm going to have to drop it, is what I told the teacher. And basically, she sent out an email to all the students, which was only like 2 or 3 or something, saying don't use AI, don't use Google Translate. And I told her you're going to have to give us fewer vocabulary words like because this is just impossible. Well, anyways, the classmates that were using Google Translate lie to the teacher, say, we're not using Google Translate. Like, we're just this smart. And made me out to be stupid because I couldn't do it without Google Translate. And I wanted to be honest and not cheat. And so I talked to my advisor, and I told my advisor, I said, I'm not the stupidest person in class. My classmate literally said, V gay, what did she say? V gay, no, she said, V bis do, or V Gates do. That's what she must have said. V Gates do. And I'm like, V Gates do. You mean V Gates dia? You got to use data. V Gates dia. And then she's like, oh yeah, that's what he meant. V Gates D. And then she used accusative. And I'm just like, this is terrible. But she was able to pass the class, and I dropped it. So anyways, that's my German experience. I have spent a lot of time with German, but I can't say that I have the highest vocabulary, but I'm going to put it in that I do know German fairly good. Ich spreche Deutsch, mehr oder weniger. Polish, I have learned how to count. I was in Poland on 2 mission trips, and Polish is a difficult language, but I did learn some basic phrases like dziękuję bardzo, and how to count. Okay, so jeden, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, I'm drawing a blank. Osham or Vosham. Yeah, Osham, Jevi, Jeshin. What ended up happening, though, is that I learned Polish numbers, and I could keep up with the score. I was learning how to basically play soccer with these kids. They call it football. And so I could keep up with the score. And so all I had to do is know the numbers up to 100. And I was able, like, on the spot, learn how to count, and I could play soccer and know where the score was. That's all I needed to know. And so that's really all I learned. And then, like, please and thank you and that kind of stuff. So I'd say very basic, but I used it, and I was able to function in Poland, where I was the one teaching English, more or less. Russian, my second year when I was teaching Polish, there were some kids from Belarus that was actually part of the group. And so then some of my students were Polish and some were Belarusian. And so one of the little kids, a 6-year-old named Vladik, he decided he wanted to teach me how to I guess understand the colors in Russian. So he would go around and be like charny, bieli, sini, krasny, and that kind of thing. So I learned the colors. His older brother, who was 17, learned me some taught me some cuss words, and that kind of thing. So I was able to learn some basic Russian, and because of that experience, when I was in the university, I took a 101 or 102 basic level Russian class. And forever now, my Polish numbers and Russian numbers are like fighting to see which one's going to win because they're so close. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not 5, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, so Russian's 8, 8, 9, 10, and then 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. No, shouldn't. 17. Okay, now I'm all mixed up because Polish and Russian go together too much in my brain. So I tried, and I could say I somewhat tried and failed, but I'm going to say the Polish and Russian are in the category that I'd love to study them more. My Slavic languages I don't have extremely well, but I'd like to study them more. Moving on to Macedonian. Okay, because of my experience in Russian and Polish, I have been able to attend the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom in Macedonian and follow along. Okay, now does this mean I can speak Macedonian? Does this mean I can converse in Macedonian? No. I know Dobra, okay? When I was shaking hands with some people and they were saying, like, how are you doing? I just answered Dobra. I like Ja sum Dobra, Dobra, okay? I also learned that they use the word sum for am, where in Russian, they don't have this word am. They just say Ja Boris or Ja Nathaniel, Ja Student. In Belarusian, in Macedonian, you're going to say Yasum Nathaniel, Yasum Dobra, I am good. So you say sum, which is like the Latin word sum. So it's interesting. It's like mixing some Latin in with the Russian, and that's Macedonian. I wasn't quite sure, as far as levels go. I'm like, okay, I can follow along the Divine Liturgy. Okay, I got a video on my YouTube channel where you can see me following along the Divine Liturgy in Macedonian. Wasn't quite sure how unique this was. One thing, though, that the priest had told me is he's like, now, Nathaniel, he's like, you do know that it's pretty unique to be able to just like come in the middle of the Divine Liturgy and like open up the book and figure out where we're at. And I was like, no, not really. I mean, I've sung in the choir. Like, I understand like the Lord of Mercies and the patterns and that. And I could figure out where we're at. I mean, I understand where we're at in the Divine Liturgy. I could find my place. He made the comment that he's like, there are Macedonians that when they come into church, they can't figure out where we're at in the Divine Liturgy. They can't find their spot. A few weeks later, I actually had a Macedonian come up to me, ask me where we were in the Divine Liturgy, and I had to help the person out to find the spot of the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom in Macedonian. And here, I don't speak Macedonian. Like, I'm not, the only thing I know is like Dobra. Yeah, Sum Dobra. But I understand it because I can read the alphabet, and I understand the Russian, and Macedonian is close enough to Russian that it's pretty close. Okay, so I could say that with Macedonian, if I combine Macedonian with the Russian and the Polish, they all work together. They could be confusing. It could be hard not to just have it all smushed together like this is one language when it's actually three. But I would say that they all balance each other out. They help me. Now, moving on from here, I have Islandski, okay, Iceland. I have been to Iceland one time. I wanted to learn some Icelandic. I thought it'd be fun. And so I could say like, what is it? Du ert Islandsker. I could say, ja American, something like that. Amerikanski, something like that. But anyways, I forgot a lot of what it was. This was 5-6 years ago. I just learned a little tiny bit of basic Icelandic just to go to Iceland. So as far as like, did I need it? No, everybody spoke English. It wasn't like I needed to have any kind of Icelandic skills. I got Harry Potter, one of the Harry Potter books in Icelandic just because I thought it was cool. I like the sound of the Icelandic language, and I think it'd be fun to actually push to like a intermediate or advanced level of Icelandic. But as far as could I, really have time and the capabilities, I'd love it. And this is something where like it's on the back burner, so to speak, where I'd love to be able to just say, hey, I want to go to Iceland. I want to like get really good at Icelandic, and I just love this Icelandic language. I think that would be cool. But as if somebody were to just say like, hey, Nathaniel, do you speak 20 languages? Is this one of your languages you speak? I would actually say no. I've dabbled in Icelandic. But as far as levels, this is one of the biggest things. If somebody's like, okay, so can you speak 20 languages? Well, what's the purpose and to what extent? So something like Icelandic, I took some of the Pimsleur method classes, understand some of the basic grammar. I understand the thorn and the ed, and it's like old English, and it's really cool and all that. Could I really converse in it? I could if I had a few weeks of practice and really like say was immersed in Iceland and like was really trying. I could get to a pretty good level, but it would take a lot of work and effort. So I would say my Icelandic definitely less than an A1 level, and I'm going to have a different pile for that. Same with like Macedonian, less than an A1 level. Something like that. Hopi. I had a math student who was in Arizona, and she spoke Hopi, Native American language. And so what I did is I took it upon myself to try to learn how to count in the Hopi Native American language. I spent several hours working on the numbers, looking up some basic grammar and that. But let me just say that as much of a polyglot and a linguist I am, I don't even remember how to count to 20 anymore. Like I tried for several hours. Like I tried to memorize it. The numbers are so crazy. Let me just actually look this up real quick so I can go on. So Sukya. Okay, so it goes like Sukya, Lukam, Payo, Naloyum, Sivo, Navai, Sanga, Nanal. Okay. You can tell why I'm a little bit confused. Like if I'm doing like Russian to Polish, my Russian and Polish kind of blend together, and but like pięć is piac, or pięćdziesiąt would be like 15. I think I said that right. Maybe I didn't. Anyways, they blend together, and so it's hard for me to keep my Russian and Polish separate. This Hopi language, a Native American language, like it is so different. I don't even know where to begin. So let's just say like if you're going to learn a lot of different languages and you put on something that has absolutely nothing to connect it with, This is something that I think is very difficult. And I'm going to say this goes with my Telugu. I tried and I failed. I really was trying to impress my student that I was going to learn how to count in her language, and so I could teach her math and use her number system. It didn't work. Sorry about that. Spanish, okay? My joke is non fablo español, okay? Non fablo. I worked with Hispanic kids over the last school semester, and what I ended up doing is I picked up a lot of Spanish from them. But what I would end up doing is I would speak Latin. So, for instance, say something like "yo fablo," and then the little kids that I was working with, they'd be like, "You dum-dum, why do you say fablo? You mean hablo? It's yo hablo español." And I say, no fablo. And so I would basically take whatever the Latin equivalent was, and I would speak with the Latin equivalent. So, like, for instance, if they finished their food, I would say finisti, and they'd be like, what in the world's finisti? And I'm like, how do you say I finished my food? And he says, oh, he terminado, and I would say, oh, tu es terminado. So I would be able to say, okay, terminaste, and I could figure out from the Spanish and turn it into Latin. And so that was really fun. Do I know Spanish? If I'm dealing with second and third graders, I could joke around and like speak Latin with them, and they can understand my Latin. So, for instance, when one of the kids was getting the soccer ball in the closet, I would say to him, tenes ilapilum. And he goes, tango, like I got the ball. And then I asked him, do you know what I was saying? I said, tenes ila pilam. And he's like, no, what's pila? And I'm like, that's the Latin word for ball. What's the Spanish word for ball? He said, oh, it's pilota. So like he figured out what I was saying because I spoke vulgar Latin to him, and he could figure it out, and vice versa. If he says tango, I know he means teneo, and vice versa. So I would say my Spanish skills, and this is where it's difficult. It's like, okay, so do I speak Spanish or do I not? Definitely less than a level A1 as far as do I speak Spanish. But because Spanish is like a dialect of vulgar Latin and I speak Latin, this is something that helps me a lot. So for instance, like modern Greek, I could say my modern Greek level is about the same. But because I know ancient Greek, this is going to help it out. So it's one of those things where if we're going to say like, okay, I know 20 languages, well, how many of these are dialects of the same language? And so if we're talking about Latin to Spanish, are we going to say this is the same language, Latin and Spanish, or a different language? What we can say is that somebody like me that studied Latin specifically and put a lot of time in Latin will be able to quite easily pick up Spanish. But am I going to be able to just like read and speak fluent Spanish? Probably not. But could I be able to have a lot of understanding, comprehension, and that kind of stuff and pick up basic skills? Probably so, and quite easily, a lot more easily than, say, trying to learn Hopi or something like that. So we're going to say Spanish is, I don't know, in with my Russian category. Italian. I'm sorry. I'm going to just say no capiche. I can understand a lot. Like I said, it's kind of like the Spanish where I understand a lot of Italian because of the Latin basis. So, like, even when the Pope was speaking in Italian about ecclesiastical things, the ecclesiastical words are so familiar because I know them in Latin. Sometimes my brain doesn't even know, is he speaking Italian or is he speaking Latin? Like, I understand what he's saying in Latin. Does this mean I speak Italian? No. So I'm going to put it with the Hopi. I do not speak Italian. French. Let's just say that I've started and I want to try to learn better French. I read my first scholarly article in French, and this is something where I think French is a nice language. I'd like to learn to at least have some basic knowledge of it. But as far as being able to speak, I think the accent's very difficult, and it's something that I don't really believe that I'm ever going to be extremely conversant in French. But what I can say is that I definitely want to try to push myself to some kind of level in French because it is important for classics majors, and reading comprehension is the most important. But as far as just understanding French, this is something that I can understand French a lot like Italian and Spanish from the Latin, but it is classified as its own language. And so far, I can't really say that I know too much French. Now, Romanian, this is another story because I actually did just finish 18 lessons of Romanian over the past week. Compared a lot of charts to Latin, spent a lot of time, at least, 10, 20 hours working on Romanian over the past week. And I would say I was able to gain about an A1 level by just constantly speaking with the Pimsleur method, working through this method. I think it's a very good way to acquire a spoken and retentive vocabulary. Now, as far as how useful is this? I don't know. I'm just interested. Like, I did a video where I was comparing a Christian song, trying to figure out how much of this can I understand from just this much. I think I did pretty well. There were definitely phrases that I didn't know, but as far as having that basic understanding of Latin to help my Romanian skills, it definitely helped. It's definitely gone a long ways. And I think if you study Romanian, this will actually help you Latin and vice versa. So, for instance, in Latin, I would say intellego for I understand. In Romanian, to say inteleg. Okay, if I wanted to say, do you understand in Latin, I would say intellegitis. In Romanian, say intelligent. So intelligent is like, do you understand, versus intellegitis. So it's just shorter. Same with other things. Like, for instance, if I wanted to say cred cano is like cred canu. I believe not. Cred in Latin is credo. So you just shorten a lot of things. And so I've been able to pick up a lot of this Romanian because it's basically able to register as like a dialect of Latin. And so I can remember the vocabulary a lot better. The words that I have a hard time with in Romanian are the words that have a Slavic origin or are completely different than Latin. The vocabulary that's similar to Latin, I'll never forget. Like credo is cred, intellego is intelleg. And even, for instance, like the G becoming a just sound versus a gus sound, this is something in the ecclesiastical pronunciation. I would say intelligo, but then if the G is followed by an I or an E or an AE, then the G sound actually makes a just sound. So you would say intelleg or intellegitis. And that's the same thing that happens in Romanian with the G sound specifically. And so this is something that's helpful. The other thing that happens is the ch sound in Romanian is the same as the ch sound in the ecclesiastical pronunciation of Latin. So, for instance, if the ch is followed by, or the c is followed by an e or an I, it's going to make a ch sound. If it's followed by an a or an o, it's a cuss sound. And so understanding the Latin is helpful to understand basic Romanian. Now, the articles are placed after the nouns instead of before. There's a lot of difference between this Romance language and, say, Spanish, French, and Italian, Portuguese, and all that kind of stuff. Is it super easy for people to just pick up Romanian? Probably not. But if you do put time and effort into it and you know another Romance language or Latin specifically, Romanian is going to be a whole lot easier to pick up. So I'm going to say on Romanian, this is definitely something that I want to learn more. I'm almost finished, and that is going to be go through Modern English. Do I speak Modern English native? Yes, I do speak Modern English. Does this mean that I speak George Orwell's 1984 language, that you basically botch up the English language and you don't use passive voice and certain things like that? No, I do not speak George Orwell's 1984 quote unquote newspeak. I speak regular Modern English. And so because of that, if, say, I'm using Grammarly, they're going to tell me all these things that I do not do because I do not speak a dumbed down Orwellian version of English. I speak the regular English. So I do use the passive voice and stuff like that. 16th century English. I've spent a lot of time working on 16th century English, read books like The Prince of Pauper, William Tyndale's translations, a lot of works from the 16th century. And so I'd say my English skills in King James-like English are just as good, if not better, as my Modern English, because I spent a lot of time in that dialect of older forms of thee and thou and ye and you and all that kind of stuff. So I could tell fake English from this period. For instance, there was a joke the other day I saw where it said something like Shakespeare says, and it used the phrase like mine stomach. And I'm just like, mine is not something that can be immediately followed by a consonant. You always would say mine apple, my banana, thine apple, thy banana, an apple, a banana. You always are going to say thine, mine, and an before a vowel. And this is something that I've noticed that a lot of people aren't familiar with if they don't spend time really understanding the grammar and the syntax and all this of this type of English. And so that would be where I would actually say, hey, I do pretty well in this kind of English. Now, what about prior to the year 1500? I'd say it's a hit or a miss. Okay, clueless sometimes, Wycliffe, Chaucer. I think some of it's funny. Like, for instance, one of Wycliffe's verses says, and Pascha, feast of the Jews, nighed. Instead of drew nigh, he uses nigh like a verb, nighed. Like I'm nighing, I'm drawing near, I'm nighing. And so he says, Pascha, feast of the Jews, nighed. Or prophets twain or three say, let the others wisely deem, which is like let the prophet speak two or once or three at the most, and then let the others judge wisely. So some of these phrases, like let the others wisely deem, it's like what in the world's wisely deem? Could be very difficult to understand. I think it's fun. I think it's cool. But do I actually understand English before 1500? It's a hit or a miss. Old English, I have dabbled in Old English. I think it's really cool. I've read through a lot of the New Testament in Old English, and I can understand because I know what the New Testament's saying. And so the Old English makes sense. Now, does this mean like I know Old English too well? I can't speak Old English. But I think it's cool, and it is definitely one of the things I'd like to dabble in more in the future, if all possible. So we've talked about over 20 languages and dialects of languages. And so now let's actually cover the question, can I or anyone else, can I be able to really be fluent or conversant or knowledgeable in 20 or more languages? And my simple answer is you can at different levels, as you've seen me describe. My Hebrew, I've pushed and shoved and become very proficient. So I can talk to people in Israel, and I can read the Old Testament. I could read the prayer books. I could read a lot. And so I would say that my Hebrew is extremely good compared to, say, something like, French that I can do a tiny bit, or Telugu. I learned how to count. And so if we are able to properly divide this up into levels, I think that an individual could say, hey, I can have a spectrum of knowledge from I know this language really well, and maybe have your top 2 or 3 languages where you're like C2 level. And then going down from there, have quite a few levels of A1 or so of introduction. Hey, I know some introduction Spanish. I know some introduction Romanian. That's wonderful. Does this mean, hey, I can go to Romania and just speak fluent Romanian? No. But if I know that basic level Romanian, if I go to Romania and spend some time and I have this knowledge of Latin, I probably could acquire it at a lot higher level with that immersion. Now, having a spectrum, I think, is important because too often times, like say on YouTube, what ends up happening is somebody's like, hey, I know like 20 different languages, and I'm like at a C2 level of all of them. That is impossible. Okay. Like that is impossible. One of the best linguists in the world that ever lived was a guy named Sir William Jones. And I have collected all of his works. Sir William Jones was the one who really established the idea that Sanskrit was like a sister language to Greek and Latin, and tried to work out this idea of Indo-European. And one of the things that Sir William Jones is known for is that he knew at least 8 different languages, about 8 languages on the level of like critical thought, another 8 languages at a little less level, a little lower level. So 16 languages at a pretty high level, and then another so many languages after that at a lesser level. So altogether, he was extremely knowledgeable about a lot of different languages. Now, what impresses me the most is that he was able to get to a very extreme level in both Persian and Sanskrit and ancient Greek and even Hebrew and Aramaic, like extremely well. Where I would say, like, because modern Hebrew is a spoken language now. I would say my Hebrew is probably better than Sir William Jones, but that's probably it as far as my Hebrew skills, because I actually talk Hebrew and there's a modern equivalent today, where as far as Sanskrit, Sir William Jones was speaking Sanskrit, immersed in India. He was doing excellent with Sanskrit, reading texts in Sanskrit. This is something like, I don't know anybody, even from the top universities, that study Sanskrit to the extent of being able to like sit down and read the whole you could maybe memorize and read through the Bhagavad Gita, but can you read the whole Mahabharata? Probably not. So having that ability to just go through and read all this Sanskritam, it's extraordinary. Okay, so having an advanced level of Sanskrit, advanced levels of, say, Hebrew, advanced levels of, say, Aramaic and Greek and Latin, and being conversant in, say, Romance languages like French and Italian and Spanish and Romanian, that I think is pretty impressive in and of itself, and something where I would say to kind of wrap this video up, I'll go through kind of what my goals would be. So I would say Old English and Icelandic. I'm going to kind of put those two together, and I'm going to say these are languages that I think would be fun to dabble in further in the future, to get better at Old English and better at Icelandic. Extremely fun languages, but kind of pointless. I mean, because in Iceland, they kind of all speak English anyways, and not too much of a point. So I'm going to say these would be fun languages for the future, not something that's extremely important or useful. Now, Romance languages. I would say Romanian. I think it would be really cool to be able to be conversant to a higher level. Same with Spanish. I think French and Italian also would be very cool. But here's the thing. Practically speaking, do I think that I could get to, say, like a B2 level to be conversant in French, Spanish, Italian, and Romanian? Probably not. So I would say that kind of the idea would be Romanian. I think it's really cool, and I want to try to push it with Romanian, see what kind of level I could get, and then Spanish and French, kind of add that on, and kind of work in a rotation with like Spanish, French, Romanian, hopefully not get all thoroughly confused and mixed up. That would be something where I think those are all part of the same linguistic family. So it's just being able to study all those as a group is pretty important. Now, same thing with Russian, Polish, and Macedonian. These are kind of all big one Slavic family. I've also thought about studying Church Slavonic, and I think it'd be extremely fun to have like a lot more study in Slavic languages. Now, practically speaking, do I think I'm going to get extremely conversant? And it depends on where the future goes. If I say move to a Slavic country, have the capability of being immersed in it and having that practice and that experience, then maybe. But I would say that that's something where it's kind of on the table. I think it'd be fun, but it would depend on where my future goes as far as will I be able to actually use Russian or Polish or any Slavic language. And if I can in the future and it's useful, I may be able to get to a higher level. Sanskrit. Am I going to be able to be like Sir William Jones? Probably not. I think Sanskrit, what I have been able to study with Sanskrit, the grammar has been very helpful for basically comparing to Greek and Latin. I think Sanskrit is very helpful, but it's extremely difficult, at least from my perspective. I think it'd be fun to be able to take some spoken Sanskrit classes. But again, am I going to, practically speaking, be able to say, hey, I'm going to just master Sanskrit? Probably not. I'd love to, but the time and effort and the situation that would have to occur to get me to become any more than just understanding basic verbs and nouns and conjugations and reading some simple phrases from the Bhagavad Gita, probably not. And I'm going to say, okay, so for Hopi language, I think this would be fun. You know, if I could have memorized how to count, say in Telugu, tried and failed Arabic and Homeric Greek. Homeric Greek, I think I have actually, I'm going to put it this way. Homeric Greek, I actually think I have a capacity to eventually be able to get pretty good at Homeric Greek. So I'm going to say Homeric Greek is something I'm going to say I'm going to hope that I could get better in the future. And I'm going to put off to the side Hopi, tried and failed. So no Hopi, no Telugu, Arabic, no. And then let me see if I can do this properly. Okay, we're going to start with what about the languages that I actually know? German, ja, ich spreche Deutsch. That's good. Latin, postum, biblical Aramaic, yes. Biblical Hebrew, yes. Koine Greek, yes. Classical Attic Greek, Ionian Greek, Modern Hebrew. Okay, so these are the languages that I actually could say that I know with some certainty. Okay, so, and we could try to count them, but here's the problem. Modern Hebrew is going to be kind of the same as Biblical Hebrew, but there's a big gap. Same with, okay, I have Modern Greek, Ionian Classical Greek, Classical Attic Greek, Koine Greek, and the Homeric Greek. And so the question is, do I count all of this as one language or several? Same with Hebrew. Do I count Biblical Modern Hebrew and Biblical Hebrew as the same language, or do I count them as separate languages? And then Biblical Aramaic, this is very close to Hebrew. It shares a lot of vocabulary, but it's a different language. So it's the same language family. How do I actually count that? And then with Latin being so close to the Romance languages that are descended from it, is that the same as Hebrew to Modern Hebrew or Ancient Greek to Modern Greek? And how would I actually count this? So we're going to give it a try. I'm going to say German. If I know it to say a B2 level or more, I'm going to say German is one of my highest levels that I know. I'm going to say the same thing with Modern Hebrew, okay? And I'm going to say, out of all these languages that I've actually studied to a pretty advanced level, that German and Hebrew are going to be my two main languages that I'm going to say I have a pretty high level, say a B2 level or higher in. And so I'm going to say, as far as the question goes, can I actually study 20 languages? I'm going to say no. Study 2 languages at a pretty good, beside your native language, like Hebrew and German. Okay, so ich spreche Deutsch, ani יכול לדבר עברית. Oh, hi there in the chat. Yes, many famous polyglots have proved it, including Cardinal Gaspel, Mezzofani. Okay, so yeah, no, it depends on the level, is basically. So, like, for instance, Hebrew, ani יכול לדבר עברית, אני יכול לקרוא, אני יכול לעשות כל מה שאני רוצה בעברית. Und ich auch spreche Deutsch. Und Deutsch und Ivrit, I think you can speak both German and Hebrew at a pretty advanced level. I would have to say that my Hebrew and German are probably B2 or higher, and this is being conservative. If I was immersed in Germany or in Israel, I can speak solely in Hebrew or solely in German, and I can figure things out, and I don't need to have a translation for the most part. Are there going to be words and phrases that I don't know? Yes. For instance, that's why I said B2 level. I'm not saying C2. I'm not saying I'm super advanced or perfect in either Hebrew or German, but I do believe that those are things where I could push myself to be a C2 within the next few years if the situation allows it. Okay, so I got certainly working through ancient Greek, Biblical Hebrew, Latin, and German. And yes, I think for Alex watching and for anybody else that's watching the stream now or in the future, yes, I think the ancient languages, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and German, those have all been sort of the classical languages. As far as I have a Greek dictionary that came out before the English to Greek dictionary came out. It was a German to Greek dictionary. And so I have an entire set, 4 volumes of the German to Greek dictionary. And there's a lot of things like that, where there's German Greek grammars, where students were learning Greek through the means of German. And I think because of that history of a lot of scholarship that happened, Greek grammars and Greek texts that have been studied through the eyes of the Germans, it is something that has been done. But again, can I get personally to that level where I can just sit down and say, oh, I'm just going to read Friedrich Nietzsche's text in fluent German? At this point, no. That's why I'm starting to try to read aloud, say, the Chronicles of Narnia in German and some more basic texts. And I think that it's possible to bridge that gap from, say, a B2 level, intermediate to advanced level of modern German. you could bridge that level to get better at German, but it definitely takes a lot of work and effort to get from that level to the other level. And so that's something where I would say that for a polyglot trying to study multiple languages like that, one of the things that needs to be in mind is how much time do I need to spend pushing myself in one language? Like I said, German, get to a higher level of German, as opposed to, hey, I think Romanian's really cool. I love Romanian. Instead of saying Inteligo, I say Inteleg. Instead of non Inteligo, I say nu Inteleg. Instead of non Skio or Neskio, I say nu Știu. Okay, it's easy. Okay, it's just easy. You can speak Romanian and it's like you're speaking Latin. This is amazing. At the same time, what's more important for me as a classics major, to get to an A1 or A2 level of Romanian, or push my German to a more advanced level? And that's something where I'd love to be able to do everything, but probably won't. Let me look back at the chat. Awesome stuff. There is a polyglot language learning method called translingualization. Hope I said that right. This channel, Decaglossa, who also promotes the modern pronunciation of Greek, also talks about it. Yes, Decaglossa is a very good channel. And one of the people that he actually recommends is a guy named Alexander. I don't know how to say his last name. He was very good at being able to train himself to read in multiple languages, and I've been trying to use his method, and I think that it works pretty well. That's where I got the idea to read Greek aloud on my channel and that kind of stuff. So what is this? Translation? Basically using second or third language to learn another. Okay, note. You're learning Romanian. I love it. Yes, Alexander. I don't know how, or whatever it is. Yes. I don't know that it's extremely helpful as far as like, hey, I don't want to like, if I got, say, a textbook in German to learn Romanian, I think that it could be pretty fun. But what I would end up running into is I don't know this word in German, and yeah, it's because I don't know Spanish phonetics. So is it Argayes, something like that? Maybe not. Because I don't know one language to that advanced level. So here's the thing. If you're completely bilingual, like you're at a C2 level or beyond in, say, Italian, by all means, go from an Italian to Latin textbook instead of English, if you really know Italian that well. I think there's Athanaza, Italian edition, something like that. Like there are ways that you can go from not your native language to another one. Do I recommend it? I would only recommend it is if you really are at that advanced level in this other language. Personally, the way that I've done this is, say, on flashcards. I've spent a lot of time working with flashcards where I would put on the flashcard, say, like I have the word gignosko in Greek, then I put gignosko in Greek. I would put aniodeia in Hebrew. I would put skio or shio in Latin, and so on and so forth. When I was learning Russian is what it was. I did this a lot with Russian because Russian, I was picking this up at the university when I was already like 22 or 23 years old. I already had this experience with Hebrew, Greek, Latin, German, basic. Those would be the basic ones: Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and German. So, and even at that time in the university, I was taking advanced classes in Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and German, and Russian all at the same time. It was one of my favorite school years. I had like a whole stack of like 6 languages on Sanskrit too. So like a whole stack of 6 languages. I loved it, that I was taking all at the same time. Now, for flashcards, helping you remember them, I think it is good to intermix it. So say on my Greek flashcards, I'll put Latin equivalents or Hebrew equivalents. And then on my Aramaic flashcards, I'll put, Greek and Latin and Russian equivalents. I think that's amazing. Now, is this something that's practical as far as acquiring a second or third language to be able to immediately translate back and forth? I think that it helps because I think it's helpful for me to be able to say, okay, say I wanted to say like the word aniodeia. I know I could then flip to aniodeia, gignosko in Greek, skio in Latin, stew in Romanian, and so on and so forth. And then you can immediately call to mind because you've remembered it that way. So if you're wanting to be able to instantly translate a word or a phrase, I think it is helpful. What do you say? I have both the UK and Italian Altanazza books. Which form of Aramaic have you been learning? Biblical Aramaic or classical Syriac? So biblical Aramaic is where I started, and I do have a classical Syriac book that I'd love to be able to just spend time getting through. The alphabet has been a challenge, and this is something where I don't actually know what it is. I think that there's a possibility that within brain development, that language acquisition is something that not everybody's able to pick up a second or third alphabet as an adult. This is something where my Sanskrit teacher, what is her name? Dr. Oh, why am I forgetting? She's the one that authored Introduction to Sanskrit, the Cambridge one. One of the things that she said in a lecture one time, she's a wonderful Sanskrit teacher, but one of the things that she said that really stuck out to me was that the script, we're talking about the script, that she said that even as much as she studied Sanskrit, that she still likes to transliterate Sanskrit into the Roman alphabet. Now, why would she do that? Because her brain processes the Roman alphabet a lot better than the Sanskrit alphabet. And she made the comment that she believes that if she would have learned the Devanagari alphabet when she was, say, I don't know, elementary school age, and used it, that she would have been able to acquire it to a more advanced level and been more fluent in the Devanagari alphabet. And so, but she still has this as somewhat of a handicap, okay, even, to this day, that she prefers looking at things with the Roman alphabet. Now, does this mean that she does not use Devanagari? Of course not. By chapter, I think it's 6, she's got all the vocabulary in Devanagari with no transliteration. She does know Devanagari, okay? And so I was forced to learn Devanagari myself, and I tried. I spent I went through a 6-week class with another guy learning Devanagari, spent a lot of time learning Devanagari. But one thing I could say is even after all that time that I spent learning Devanagari, after I've had a break from the Devanagari script and I go back, that issue is still an issue to me to this day, is the script. So the same thing goes with Aramaic. If I'm reading, say, Daniel in Aramaic, and it's in the biblical Hebrew script, which is actually an older Aramaic form of the script, I could understand it super well. I even have a copy of the Peshitta, and the Peshitta is in the regular looking Hebrew alphabet. And so I can understand the Peshitta based on that. Now, what about other forms of the script? I have spent some time trying to teach myself, like the Arabic script. How do you pronounce it? Strangula, I think, script. I have been able to get to the point, even say Paleo Hebrew. Okay, I can get to the point where I can read, say, a text in Paleo Hebrew, one word at a time, and sort of follow along. Even with an audio version, sort of follow along with an audio version of, say, Paleo Hebrew or Aramaic. I could follow along slowly, but writing it then, I don't know that I have the best tools to write, say, Syriac. And so that would be the thing that I would struggle with. This may be harsh sounding, but I feel one should force oneself to read the script of any language and not use Roman script as a crutch. That is true. And that's where I think that it's interesting, because I've had so much experience with a lot of different languages, to really kind of talk about where I would struggle. So, for instance, I started to learn Hebrew when I was 13. I picked up the Hebrew alphabet super fast. I used the Pimsleur method. There was a little CD-ROM that had like a read along and you'll learn the alphabet and everything. I did that, learned the alphabet once. It stuck with me to this day. I could read anything in Hebrew, and I'm not wondering, is this like, a chametz or a chametz ketuf or whatever. I can read it. I believe it had to do with how little I was when I learned it. And then I used it constantly. So it's not just like, oh, I was 13 when I learned it and then I never used it. I was 13 when I learned it and I constantly used it at least on a weekly basis, if not daily basis. And so that's where I would say my Hebrew alphabet, I've constantly been using now since I was 13 on a weekly basis for a good 15 years or more. I mean, so that's a long time to have that on a constant regular basis. I have that Hebrew alphabet down really well. Same with the Greek alphabet. I've been using it since I was 11. Now, one thing that is different with the Greek alphabet is I had learned an Erasmian pronunciation, and I had to retrain myself to a modern pronunciation only about 3 years ago. I don't know why it was that it worked. Okay, this is the thing that I think is very interesting. I think where I had this alphabet down, where I would read, say John 1:1, it would be like, and arche, ain, halagos, ke halagos, ain proston theon, ke theon, ain halagos. Okay, now I think that's atrocious. It sounds terrible. But again, this is where I was for like 14 years. I was studying ancient Greek and I was reading like this, ain, halagos. And then I switched. I had to go back to the alphabet. I took an introduction to Greek where the teacher was like, repeat after me all the letters, all the phrases, everything I had to learn from scratch again at the age of 25. I retaught myself the alphabet with a native speaker. And then now I'm able to go in archi and logos, ke logos in proston thon, ke thon in logos. Okay. Do I have an accent? Sure. Of course I'm going to have an American accent, but it's a lot better. I'm going to go back to the chat. Okay. So, I've been doing this with Hebrew and I'm now able to see the right letters in my head. I was seeing the right line strip. And yes, and so for Hebrew, it does take some time. Sometimes you do need that intermediate stage where you're transliterating. One of the classes that I was taking, it wanted everybody to like transliterate Hebrew to English letters. I do not find that the most helpful. I think it's better to just learn how those letters are and just use those letters. Okay. Now that's to be said, the best way to go. With Sanskrit, though, I still, when I go back and I'm like, I'm going to crack open my textbook and I'm going to spend some time with Sanskrit. I think it was just last summer, I spent a long time cracking open my book, studying Sanskrit again. And what did I do? I went back to every letter of the alphabet and had to transliterate it. And remember, okay, is this a duh or tuh or duh or tuh? Duh, duh, tuh, tuh. Like it's difficult. So I definitely understand that. And then Paleo Hebrew is cool. So many Paleo Hebrew and Phoenician inscriptions there. Even the Samaritan Pentateuch is written in Paleo Hebrew alphabet. So yes, and this is something too where I think some of it depends on the experience. One of my friends in Israel, he's talked about how he actually could understand the Samaritan dialect of biblical Hebrew. Like he could walk in a synagogue and they're speaking in their Samaritan dialect. He could understand it. For me, I'd be completely lost. Okay. Where if I went into say an Ashkenazi synagogue and they're all saying, Baruch Hashem, talking about Shabbos and say they're saying Shalom, Havenu Shalom Alechem or whatever, Shalom Alechem or I don't know, anything with the oi sound, I can adapt to that. The stress is different. The O's are all ois. The final T's are like S. I can understand that, where like the Samaritan dialect, I can't really. It's like all gibberish to me. Where to this person who's an Israeli, he says he can understand that dialect. And he's like, Ashkenazi said, I thought that was all Yiddish for the longest time. I didn't even know that was Hebrew. So that's, the extent of understandability. It doesn't always cross over. So interesting stuff. Yes. Okay. That's as much for the chat. So kind of, I don't know, to wrap this up, unless there's more we want to talk about, to wrap this up, one of the biggest questions is, as a polyglot, what should be the focus? Should it be, I just want to learn, a million languages? Should it be zeroing in on one or two? What should be the goal? And I can say from experience that I think that there needs to be a balance both directions, okay? Because when I was in the university and I literally had my stack of like 6 language books and I was like, I'm studying Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Aramaic, Russian, and Sanskrit. Did I mention German? All at the same time. My professor, my academic advisor, literally thought I was crazy. He gave me the advice that you're doing too much, you're overkilling yourself. Nobody does this. I don't know, Elohina, yeah. Nobody does it. So his recommendation was stop Russian. That's just a waste of your time. Don't do Sanskrit. He told me maybe Hebrew, Greek, and Latin and German. He's like, you could do 4 languages. That's cool. But he's like, anything beyond that, just stop. Don't do. It's going to hurt your capabilities in the ones you need to focus on. That was my academic advisor's idea. And so what I ended up doing is kind of going behind his back. I took a modern Greek class from the University of Athens that he never knew about. I took biblical Hebrew and Aramaic classes that I never told him about, and Sanskrit at the same time without him ever knowing about it. So I kind of had to circumvent, like go around my advisor's advice just because his advice wasn't practical. He was trying to limit me to say, don't study all these languages at the same time. It's going to hurt you. I never saw it as hurting. For instance, the Sanskrit infinitive ends with And when I was learning then the Latin supine, the supine ends with an And I'm like, oh, that's like the Sanskrit infinitive. Now, of course, my academic advisor, when I mentioned that, like, oh, yeah, it's just like the Sanskrit infinitive, he's kind of making fun of me, like, oh, yeah, just like Sanskrit infinitive, or whatever, because most people, even at that advanced level in Latin and Greek or whatever, they do not have that repertoire of all these languages. So is it something that I was doing that was beyond the normal? Yes. But could I handle it? Yes. And so I would encourage anybody that's wanting to study multiple languages, don't let even an academic advisor limit you to say you can't study more than 4 languages at the same time at a university level. I was studying 6, okay, and I did great in all my classes. I told you I dropped out of my German 201 or 202 and got a W for withdraw. But again, that was because I was not wanting to cheat and everybody else was using Google Translate. And so the classes that I succeeded in because I actually did the work and I pulled it off. So I would encourage you to, if you can handle multiple languages, go for it. Now, if you can't, don't push yourself. So, for instance, I have interest in a dozen or 2 dozen languages. I'd love to be able to say, hey, I'd like to add on Icelandic and Old English and, Polish and Chinese and whatever. That's where you got to draw the line where it needs to be drawn. And so, for instance, like my interest is, I'd love to, study 15 to 20 languages. I have to draw it back into what's practical. And then when the opportunity arises, say I get to go to Iceland again, I'll be able to be like, hey, look, I'm going to go to Iceland again. Now's the time to I'm going to add on some additional Icelandic studies and go crazy with Icelandic. Until that happens, I'm going to have to just say, you know what, I love Icelandic, but I'm not going to go gung-ho Icelandic with other things that are more important to focus on. Okay, Samaritan represents an evolved form of Hebrew phonology that stayed stagnant in the liturgy. I've tried studying almost 10 at the same time, and at one point I had a limit result of 4 or 5. Yeah, that's exactly the same for me. Is it possible to study 10 languages at the same time, like juggling them? Yes, of course it is. Okay. But practically speaking, how much time are you going to be spending with that? And one thing that I can say, especially for trying to be extremely conversant in, say, like Hebrew, German, Hebrew-German, for instance, I spent a lot of time, like listening to music, watching TV shows, hours and hundreds and thousands of hours. Okay, maybe not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of hours in Hebrew and thousands of hours in German. And I understand what it takes to get to a level of just say a B2. Okay, so it's like I can go to Israel and I can talk to people in Hebrew. Now, unfortunately, most of the Israelis have a C2 or higher level of English, and so they're still going to have better English than my Hebrew. But I've gotten to a point where I'm able to actually talk to people in Hebrew and even make, friends and connections and be able to do that. So realizing how much time and effort I've had to spend where I've been surrounded in listening to Hebrew music, listening to Hebrew media and all that kind of stuff, to be able to say, okay, what would it take for, say, Romanian to get to that point where I could just go to Romanian and have a B2 level? I think with the Latin similarities, it could happen a lot easier than, say, it did with Hebrew because of the connections. So if you have shared language families, I would say definitely go there and try. But say something like, I don't know, let's say like the Hopi language. I think I could go to Arizona and immerse myself in Hopi and just voila, get to a B2 level? Probably not. Okay. Not unless I spent like 20 years. And I still don't think that my Hopi, even after 20 years, would be as good as, say, my Latin or German or Hebrew. So I would say, and I would put the reason why I'd make that comment is because I've spent a lot of time and acquired a lot of these languages at a younger age. And so I would say at my age right now, I can only pick up languages and remember them if there's something to connect it with. And that's something that I think is actually extraordinary, that when I was younger, Anima de Berivrit, it sounds absolutely like gibberish, but I can remember Anima de Berivrit when I was 13. Bring it to the age 28, try to just memorize how to count in the Hopi language, and you're like, Sukam and Pupai and different things like that. I'm just like, what in the world? Pupai, Pupam, Sukai, Sukam. Like, I don't know what's going on, and I'm just all confused. Not everybody's like this. Okay, some people, even as older, you can actually acquire languages that sound like gibberish. But at least my experience is that the younger the age, the easier it is to acquire languages like Hebrew that are completely different than English, Greek, and that kind of thing. And then as you get older, it's going to be harder and harder to remember those words if they don't have something to be similar to. So that's where I can easily branch out from my Latin into Romanian or French or Spanish or Italian or whatever, Portuguese maybe. I can connect it to the Latin, and so it's easy to remember. Say I was going to do the same thing with, anything else. Probably not. Let me go back to the chat. I recommend studying phonology more and getting better native accent in any language. Yeah, and I definitely agree with that idea. I would say that the biggest thing there is just trying to master what you can and not to be too critical about things that you're not able to master. For instance, my Hebrew and my German accents are fairly good. My Greek, probably not so much. Now, for my Greek, if I wanted to say like Thaithala na piokati, everybody in Greece, they're going to be like, oh yeah, he just said I want to drink something. Thaithala na piokati. Am I going to sound like I have an American accent? Of course I am. If I speak, say, Hebrew, and I say, ani rotzeh lachul mashu, and I say, rega, ani be'emet rotzeh lachul mashu, my accent's fairly good. And same with German. My accent's fairly good. And I don't know if it has to do more with picking the language up as a younger kid, or if it is something to do with just maybe my heritage. Like, for instance, I am like 30% Jewish and like 10, 15, 20% German. And so I don't know if it's more of a genetic, like, hey, I got this Hebrew and German in my DNA, so I'm going to have a better accent. Where, say, with Greek, I don't have any Greek nationality in me, so I'm not going to have the best accent. It's a theory. My biggest conclusion is actually that I had listened to a lot of music in Hebrew, between 15 or even 13 years old up until even now. I will listen to a lot of music in Hebrew. So I'm constantly surrounding my subconsciousness, listen at night, 6, 7, 8, 10 hours, of immersing myself and just listening to that Hebrew language. And I do believe that because I've listened to Hebrew so much, that subconsciously there is a connection that's been able to help me pronounce words more fluently without a big of an accent, to the point where I do have people telling me like, oh, I thought you were native for a while, but then there's that one thing you pronounced funny, and I could tell, oh, you must not be native. And people will tell me that even people that are immigrants from Israel that have kids over here, they will speak poor Hebrew than I do. And I've wondered about that because I'm just like, well, what do you mean they speak poor Hebrew? Like they have parents that speak fluently to them. But what ends up happening is if you're not surrounded with that, where you're always listening to Hebrew, say the TV's in Hebrew, your music's in Hebrew, everything's in Hebrew. If you're not surrounded to the point of immersion, you are going to acquire an accent. So I would say with Hebrew, I have surrounded myself to the point of not having that thick of an accent, maybe having a slight one, but not that thick of an accent. And I would say I've done the same thing with German, where other languages, I don't think it's possible to subvert that and say, I'm going to, now I'm going to just learn Arabic and I'm not going to have any accent. I'm going to learn French and I'm just going to be like, je peux, I am able, je peux, and I'm not going to have any accent. Nobody's going to know I'm an American. I don't think it's going to happen. Okay. Let me go here. Great live discussion. Loved it. Have a great day, brother. Yes. Thank you, Alex, for watching. It's been great that you joined the chat. I think I'm pretty much ready to wrap it up. Thanks for my 3 live viewers at the time. If there's any other last minute questions, please ask in the chat. Otherwise, I'll give it about maybe 3 or 4 minutes to wrap this up. And hopefully it'll be able to, be helpful for some people that do have this interest in a lot of languages, do want to be like, hey, I'd love to be this super polyglot, love, study 20 languages, 50, 100 languages. I'd just love to do this. Hopefully it helps people get to a point of being practical. That's kind of my point in this video is what's practical. So I would say what would be practical is if, say, your native language is like English or something beside English. Okay, let's say that 2 different things. If your native language is English, try to study 1 or 2 languages to at least a B2 level. And if possible, push it to like a C2 level. Okay, so that's where, like, for me, I'm going to try to be pushing my German and my Hebrew to let's say like a C2 level. Okay, I think getting my 2 most advanced languages to a C2 level would be very important. And if you don't speak English as your first language, work on getting English to a C2 level. Okay, that make sure that your English skills are good because that's going to be extremely important. And then if you have a second or third language, make sure to work on those and keep pushing them to that advanced level. Where I said my academic advisor had been like, you're stretching yourself too thin. Don't be studying 6 languages at the same time. One of his critical pieces of advice was around the possibility that if you learn a lot of languages, just like a very, very, very basic level, you're not going to be able to really master anything. And so you want to definitely work on mastering something. Now, because I started studying Greek when I was 11, Hebrew when I was 13, and Latin when I was 14, I had a lot of roots. And so that's something, if you have those roots that, hey, look, I've studied Hebrew and I've studied Greek for a long, long time. And if you have that structure where you're already on the path to being an expert in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, say, and even German, like for me, I had worked on Hebrew, Greek, and Latin and German all when I was in high school, being homeschooled, and had experience, had a lot of work on those languages. So for me, the only languages I was really adding in college was Aramaic, Sanskrit, and Russian. So it wasn't like I'm just going to learn 6 languages all at once. I think that's the other thing is if you're slowly adding on a little bit more or another language after a few years, that's something that I think is practical. But would I recommend to just be like, hey, you know what? I want to be a pastor someday. So I want to learn Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, German, French, and Aramaic. And I'm just going to do this on the fly and I don't have any experience. No, start with 1 language. Start with maybe even 2 languages. But I would say for starters, don't start with like 6 languages, okay? Start 1 at a time or the most 2 at a time, and then slowly add on when you have a strong foundation. Like for instance, in Aramaic, I would say don't start biblical Aramaic unless you already have a good grasp on biblical Hebrew grammar. And that's something I know from experience. I had a lot of classmates in a biblical Aramaic class they flunked out because they were trying to push themselves to biblical Aramaic when they didn't even have their biblical Hebrew down. So everything in due time. Same thing with really anything that you're studying. Don't push yourself to a point where you can't keep up. So, don't just start 6 languages if you can't keep up. Now, can you dabble in 20 languages? Yes. And that's one thing that I can say from experience. I have dabbled in 20 languages or more, and that's something that you can do. But you will have to be able to balance that act to say, look, I've dabbled in maybe 25, 30, or 40 languages. I think something like Icelandic is a beautiful language. I'd love to be fluent in it. And just realize, like, I'm not going to have time to get to that level. So what am I going to do? I'm going to focus on the languages that I do need and have interest and have a practical purpose for. And the other languages, just play around with it. Have fun. Old English. I think Old English is fun. I'll have some fun with it. But not to say I'm going to actually become fluent in Old English. So I think that's my 4-minute summary. And I don't see anything more in the chat. So we're going to wrap it up there. And hopefully this has been an interesting video for the few people who have joined us live. And hopefully you've learned something. And hopefully you know that it is possible to at least dabble in 20 languages. But don't get your hopes up that it'll be overnight. Okay, that's something we hadn't covered, but that's another thing to mention. The languages that I've worked the most on has been over a period of anywhere from my Greek's been 17 years of study and my Hebrew's been 15 years of study. Don't think you're going to learn anything overnight. Don't think you're going to learn anything in 2 or 3 weeks or 6 months or even a year. You can get to, say, a very basic level of studying. If you put in time over a year or two, you can get to a pretty decent basic level like my Russian. I put 1 whole year of basic level Russian, and I got to a pretty basic level in it. If you want to get to an advanced level, you're going to have to study for a long time, put a lot of hours into it, use very good methods, and have a lot of interest to keep you going to make it work. And that's something that I think is possible to do with 3 to 4 languages, possible to do with 5 or 6 if you already have that basic foundation. And it's possible to dabble in more languages, but remember your strongholds. Remember where you have your best knowledge and basis, and don't try to push yourself to the point of saying, I know a billion languages, and you don't even know your second language past an A1 level. Make sure that you focus on that. So I think that's pretty much it for today. Thank you guys for watching, and I will be back in another stream doing other things and probably reading either some Hebrew, Greek, Latin, German, or something like that later on. Thank you very much, and Lahita Ot.